and welcome back. I'm Jane Wakefield and I'm here today with Richard, the co-founder of Juro. So Richard, introduce yourself and explain to us a little bit about what Juro does.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm Richard Mabey, co-founder and CEO of Juro. Juro is an intelligent contract automation platform. So in plain language, what that means is we help businesses streamline the process of taking a contract, a legal contract, from creation through to agreement. We do that increasingly using applications of generative AI.
Now, let's talk about the C word, COVID. What was life like for you as a company pre-COVID, and then how did that change when we all went into lockdown?
Well, we kind of got started in 2017. So in sort of 2016, we were thinking about this, and 2017, we got our first customers and we got started. And so we had about 3 years or so from first customer to, as you put it, the C word coming to the fore. And so when we started, the thing that was unusual is we had two co-founders in the business, so me and Pavel, and we started distributed from the get-go. So Pavel was in Riga in Latvia, which is where he's from. We're kind of old friends. I was in London. And so we kind of had the experience of what does remote look like from inception. But of course, it was pretty different. And we had an office in Latvia. We had an office in London. We just did it like that. I think for us, COVID had a few effects. So some, of course, very negative. And so, for the team, it was extremely tough. And we had to figure out, what does true distributed working look like where you're not in an office, but you're at home. And at the same time, from a perspective of using software, a lot of businesses were forced to use online platforms for contracts because they couldn't do it in person. And so we saw kind of twin problems of a surge of demand, which is a good problem to have. And of course, all of the challenges of figuring out actually how you do it.
So how did you pivot? I hate that word, but I'm going to use it anyway. And make sure that with this increased workload, you were also still keeping up your own productivity in a world where you couldn't actually physically go to an office.
So we spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I think we tend to think about building a company like building a product. And one of the things I always feel is that products have so much craft and love put into them. And sometimes the way the company operates is a bit of an afterthought. And so we started thinking about, well, if we imagine that our employees were the users of this product called the company, and if we imagine that we have to deliver a service which allows them to be productive, what would it look like? And the first principle we started with was outcomes first. So we said, look, we employ adults at Juro, and those adults are responsible people who should know how to run their days. And what we judge them on is not, presenteeism in the office or kind of, what they do. We judge them on the results that they drive. And that sounds really kind of obvious, but actually, a lot of companies really don't think in that way. And so that was step one. Step two was we thought about, well, like what structures and processes would we need? And so there were certain things we did which really made a difference. And one was we started to document more heavily. And that sounds kind of a little scary, but what it meant was rather than have a lot of meetings in person and a lot of context, we captured some of that context in documents. So that might be kind of handbooks and playbooks and all those sorts of things, but that became quite big for us. And then the next thing is we tried to get really, really good at using the tools we had. So, everyone at that point was getting on Slack or Teams, but, there's a good way and a bad way of using it. And so we started thinking about what are the guardrails there. And we use new tools. One we love is Loom, so the ability to record a video and share it asynchronously. So a lot of that thinking was just about, we were starting to think about Zoom fatigue, and you were hearing things in the media about people kind of having their mental health impacted by ways of working. So we just tried to take the steps we could in the early days, and those things made a difference.
Heavy documentation sounds like a lot more work for people. Was that an issue? Because people are quite lazy, aren't they? And if you give them a big document to read, chances are they'll either not read it at all or just skim read it.
Totally, yeah. It was a big change. I mean, I think I come from a legal background, so I love documents, right? One of my sort of superpowers is like a really intense document. But it's not natural for a lot of people, and of course, context gets lost, right? If you have the written word or a podcast with video, you get more context from the video, right? So how do we put that in place? Well, one is we got very big on playbooks. So what do I mean by a playbook? Playbook might be, you're the sales team, and it's really, really important to document what are the stages of the sales process. If you're all in the same room, you kind of get it anyway because people are on the phone and you overhear them and there's a kind of shared understanding. But if you're all in your bedrooms, it's very different. And so to document step by step and make it really, really clear made a big difference. And especially for junior folks, so we were hiring, people straight out of school or out of university. They weren't getting the benefit of just learning by osmosis. And so we had to take that proactive step of training and making sure that we had the documentation and process there.
So what does the working week look like now? Because we're very much in a sort of period where we're still experimenting with things, aren't we? We're not quite over COVID in terms of people still want some remote work. How have you managed that, especially given you've got workers in many different countries?
Yeah, we had to make a call. And there was a time, I think it was probably in 2021, so it was after the first kind of wave of COVID, where companies were making decisions on what's going to be the service level agreement for getting people back to the office. And some companies went super extreme and said, this remote work thing is nonsense, everyone back 5 days. Some people said, you need to come in 3 days. And some companies said, we're going to be full remote. We actually did none of those things, which is we kept an office, a hub, in case people wanted to use it, and we had no policy. And so we said, we are going to continue to judge people on results and outcomes and the quality of their work, but it's going to be up to them how they want to work. And there was kind of a lot of pushback in the market at that time, but actually it's worked fine. And so we have some people who choose to come to our hub. We have a hub in London Bridge, and they come 5 days a week because they want to be there. We have some people who are in the UK, living in Cornwall in a camper van and surfing every day and never come to the office and still get results. And so when we think about flexibility, we've tried to take a fairly extreme approach, and we've never done the come back X days a week. And so far it's worked well, but there are a lot of things you have to change in the company to facilitate that and make it successful.
And what are those things?
Well, I think, pretty nuts and bolts things, actually. So I have an allergic reaction to internal meetings. And so the thing that tends to happen if you have a hybrid and remote setup is there is a large volume of Zooms. And we've all been there where you're kind of staring at your own face, 8 hours a day on a Zoom call. And it's really, really tough. And so we've found consistently over time, there'll be creep into those meetings. So I'll give you an example. I mean, we run a quarterly thing called the Keep It Simple Sprint, or the KISS. We have one of our company values is Keep It Simple. And we just have a purge. And so during this purge, people volunteer unnecessary meetings, rituals, Slack channels, and we put them all on a bonfire and we kill them. And we do that every single quarter now. And what happens is, as you go into the quarter, more and more stuff accumulates, everyone starts getting a bit burned out, and then when we refresh it. So you need these rituals. And I think you need people to take the tough calls and ask really difficult questions like, why are we having this meeting every week? Could it be an email? Why are we having this meeting every month? Like, do we need to have instead a forum or a meetup in person? And so it's that challenge, I think, every day against the creep that can make a difference.
It sounds like what you did was very brave and continues to sort of be quite an efficient way of doing things. Some companies, some big corporations, amongst them Nike, have said that actually they think that having a hybrid model has made them less efficient and are using that as a sort of reason to try and pull people back into the office full time. What do you sort of think about that? Is that just a corporate viewpoint because they can't be as agile as you can?
I think Nike is a really interesting example because they're a very creative company, right? So it's a company that sells a commodity like shoes and somehow has made you feel differently about, this. And so creativity was very big for them. Apple, drew heavily from Nike's playbook in marketing. There's a lot of, quotes from Steve Jobs about Nike. And so I think the more creative you are as a company, I do think that is a challenge and a concern. And I think that the general logic is it's really hard to replicate the magic of in-person. So if you have a workshop in person with a team and you're all around a huge whiteboard and figuring stuff out, it's very hard to recreate that on Zoom. So we do two things that we think help. The first is, because we have a remote hub and we have some people in the UK and we have multiple countries, we do a lot of online whiteboarding. And so there are tools which have got better at this over time, like Miro and FigJam, which sort of try to recreate the magic. And so it's really hard if you're just staring at a sort of agenda to be creative, but you can do it to some extent. And then the other thing is we have now a lot of meetups. And so we've actually increased the frequency of this. But for example, our product design and engineering teams will all meet up once a quarter. So, quite expensive for the company in terms of time, in terms of cost to fly everyone. We did this in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago. But we do that to invest in giving the room for the creativity. And I think that's just really hard to replicate if you're just on Slack and Zoom.
And you mentioned that you can get overwhelmed with comms. And one of the things that I felt that happened during lockdown is that because we were constantly on Slack or email, that sort of demarcation between work and life balance, for want of a better phrase, was very blurred. What do you do about that so that you're not overwhelming people with comms? And the report that TechSpace did this year, I think, singles out comms as one of the sort of problem areas for remote working.
Well, I don't think we've nailed that. So I think we definitely see that challenge day to day. I think a few things. I mean, comms comes in different forms, right? So you've got probably the worst and most toxic kind, in my opinion, is notifications. Right. So this is something which obviously is causing a lot of problems on smartphones. Social media is a big offender at this. But what a lot of people do when you turn up at work is you have desktop notifications. So, we send 30,000 Slack messages a month. And so if you have desktop notifications turned on, it may be that you can respond faster, but boy, is it overwhelming. And so, we try to encourage switch off all notifications. If someone desperately needs you, there's your phone number somewhere and someone's going to call you, but most of the time it's not as urgent as you think. And so little things like that can really, really help. But yeah, the volume is still really high, and I struggle with it as a founder. And I think when it comes to work-life balance, I mean, I have 2 kids, and so work-life balance is just a kind of constant struggle. But I think the little things make a difference, which is, do you have control over your time? And so we have, someone in my team in the Exco has kids, and we have a lot of people who have parents in the company. And we try and give the flexibility that if you want to go and pick up your child from nursery, a couple of days a week, you should be able to do that. And that should be sacred. So it shouldn't be the case that you're doing that and you're getting fired notifications from, on your phone saying, why haven't you responded? Because you then can't be present in the moments that matter for you personally. And so I think you've got to have a lot of discipline and rigor around it. And as I say, we haven't nailed it. We just kind of keep chipping away.
And the other thing that people are much more concerned about now is their own, I think you mentioned it earlier, mental health, well-being. This has become, quite rightly, I think, sort of a much more important aspect of work. So how do you as a company make sure that you are looking after people? Has that changed since COVID? What's your policies around that?
I think it has. I mean, I think it all starts with good intent. So we spend a lot of time thinking about values and behaviors in companies, and it's kind of a controversial topic. We've all been in those large corporates that have these sort of strange values that no one understands, and they're on the wall saying, we love teamwork, and everyone's just kind of confused by what's happening and where they came from. And so when we created values and behaviors, the first thing we did is we did it bottoms up. So meaning we went and we had groups of people in the company. We figured out, what do we care about and what are we really good at? Not what do we want to be good at in the future, or what do some people care about? What are the common themes? And the most interesting thing that came out of that was a value which we call be more human. And that's the thing that Juro has become known for. We have some other values, no one ever talks about them, but this be more human thing is kind of curious. And so what does it mean? And I think it comes down from my personal experiences in large corporates is often work is a very inhuman environment. So people come to work and they come not really as their authentic selves, but they come as sort of a professional version of themselves. There tends to be a lot of politics. And so it's an inherently inhuman thing. And you're on your treadmill from an hour to an hour, 9 to 5, whatever it is. And I just think, it's very monotonous and it causes people a lot of unhappiness. And I don't think it has to be like that. So our intent has always been build a company where people can be themselves and want to come to work. Now, what really matters is the actual stuff you do, because it's one thing to say that, but how do you make that real? And so I think a lot of that comes down to facilitating ways of working, correcting bad behaviors. So if you see any toxic behavior, it must be corrected, and then consistently reinforcing the values. And we do that in lots of ways. I mean, lots of silly ways, right? So we have 4 values. Each of them has a emoji which was created for the value. And when someone shouts out someone in our Slack channels, people can react with that value. It sounds so kind of simple, but it's that reinforcement and making it real. Equally, when we judge performance, we judge not just how much do people kind of bring to the company, but how are they behaving? And so you can have amazing top salespeople who bring in $5 million a year, but actually are kind of crushing the culture. Or you can have people who bring in $2 million a year, but are actual real culture carriers and really care. And so spend a lot of time just trying to correct for that. And if you get that right in the early days, the theory is that it scales. If you get it wrong in the early days, then you're in trouble.
You mentioned sales there, actually, and I think the report found that sales teams are the ones that most like that in-person kind of meetup. Have you found that, different aspects of your business need to be together more, or does everybody basically need some, in-person office time?
We found exactly that. So it was all the cliches came true. So sales wants to be in the office. They want a buzzy floor generally. And so if you go to our London hub, you'll see a high presence of sales there. It's the same with other commercial teams, so marketing, customer success as well. Engineering, we have fully remote. So I don't think we have a single engineer who is regularly in the office. And that has suited engineering. So much as I wish the cliches aren't true, actually that was exactly our experience.
And what do you do in terms of incentivizing people to come in now? Because it does feel that these days it's a drag to people. It's like an annoyance. I've got to get on a train. I've got to go to an office. But if you can kind of make that a more interesting experience, people are also quite shallow. They like offices that have dogs or alcohol. Do you have those things, or are there other ways that you're kind of incentivizing people to be back into the hubs?
So I think of it as push and pull, right? So you see a lot of companies who are doing the push. You will come to the office 3 days a week, or there will be consequences. And that, for us feels inherently inhuman. And also, people hate it generally because some people will love it and some people will say, actually, I didn't sign up for this. So we have completely avoided push. In terms of pull, that's the interesting thing, is how do you create a magnet in the office where people would want to come? And I think there are lots of ways. I think design is really important. So if you just have banks of faceless desks, it's, an environment which isn't particularly nice, versus we have like a little amphitheater in our office where people can huddle. We have, quite a lot of meeting space where people can kind of chat. And so we design it for collaboration, because if you're going to be in an office, the only reason to be there is to be in person with other people. Right? There's no real other reason. And so we try and facilitate that. And yeah, I mean, I tried bringing my DAX in for a while. It didn't work out. It was productivity tanked. So we don't do that. But, we try to have a nice space and make it kind of somewhere people want to be.
So we've had enough time now to sort of almost measure a little bit how the different new normal is working. And you sound like a company that is very keen on the metrics and working out, what's working. So what have you discovered from the last sort of couple of years of being back to some kind of normality?
Well, the thing that worries me is there is a general trend, a downwards trend in engagement of people in tech companies. And so we see this in a couple of ways. Some people who've just grown up in the boom era, right? So people who got their first job in 2019, let's say, went through COVID, and that for technology companies was generally a boom. There's obviously lots of difficult things about that period, but as a tech company, you saw a lot of willingness to pay, and the wheels were being greased in a way that when we started the company, everything was just a little bit harder, and so that's a weird thing, and that never happened before. There was never a profession of going into tech scale-ups because there weren't any, and so startups especially were attracting kind of quirky types who had no experience and just figuring it out. So that's the thing that shifted. We measure engagement, and we do that on a quarterly basis now. So we measure an engagement score, an employee NPS score, so net promoter score. And over time, you see the bumps, right? So when we started out, we had an eNPS of 96, which was sort of just everyone giving 10 out of 10, tattooing Juro on their arms. We're having the time of our lives. And it's different now. Obviously we're much bigger as a company, but people think about work differently, and we see that. And so we focus on what we can control, and we can't control the general downwards trend, but we can try really hard to give people a great experience of coming to work.
Now, we were chatting before we sat down here, and you were talking about the different offices you have around the world. I'm interested to know a bit about, whether you see cultural differences in different countries. And you mentioned that you've also got quite a few people joining the company from Russia, looking to get out of the regime there. So talk me through that a bit, because that also sounds like it's a fascinating experience for a company.
For sure. I mean, the thing I always say to people when I meet them in the company and they're not British is the thing you need to know about British people is we're very indirect, and it's a really big problem, and I'm sorry. And so for sure,
You're good at apologising,
we're great at apologising. And so I think we definitely see that dynamic play out. There are some cultures that are more direct. There are some cultures that are more indirect. There are some cultures that are more consensus driven. There are some cultures which are more around, listen and decide. So we have to navigate that. But we want diversity in the team. We want international diversity, and we've always had it since inception, and it's a great advantage. We did hire a lot of Russian speakers, and people came from Russia, and we had folks who we moved to Latvia, and we have folks who are now in our Portugal hub who are Russian speakers, and there's amazing talent there. And we have certainly seen, for political reasons, a migration of talent into Europe, and we have been a beneficiary of that. Obviously, that was a pretty tough time for those folks, and we did what we could to support them and relocation them and make sure that was smooth. But I'm a general believer in you try and find the best talent wherever it is, and you try and facilitate the ways of working to make sure that you can collaborate well.
And what about people's experience of offices in different countries? Is it common across Europe that people want to be in the office a bit but also want to work remotely, or are you seeing really big kind of regional differences on that?
Hard to tell if the differences are big. Definitely we see, we have Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, Latvia, Germany, and they are now all fully remote. So we did at one point have an office in Latvia. We no longer have a physical office in Latvia. And generally speaking, they are heavily product design and engineering. And so I'm not sure if it's driven by the function or by the country, but there is a real kind of desire to join a company that is remote friendly and remote first. And that's what we try to do.
That's a good point, isn't it? Because people are now more upfront about saying what they want from a company. They're not just sort of passive, grateful for a job without any questions. And one of the things that people are particularly keen on is benefits. And the text-based report found that particularly for young people, decent benefits, whether it be healthcare, maternity, paternity leave, that's a real important thing. So how do you sort of deal with that?
We definitely see that shift. And I think, there are some net positive things about that. So I think people think really hard about the match between the company and them. And that's great, actually, because it leads to better retention over time. And so we do that in a couple of ways. One is in the interview process. We try to be as transparent as we can. We try and make it a two-way conversation. And, some companies will sell heavily a role, and then people get in, they realize the role wasn't what was expected. And that actually helps no one, because, people tend to not add value in the first 3 months. They add value over years. So we try and be really transparent. And then on benefits specifically, we again thought about that in kind of product terms. So if the company's a product and the employees are your users, what are the needs of your users? So we started with discovery, and we basically asked people, which again sounds really simple, but often companies don't ask. And so we kind of stacked ranked what was important, and we saw very clear patterns. So healthcare was extremely important. We have, private healthcare at a top tier that disregards pre-existing medical conditions, for example. And this was a really, really important thing. Pensions was very important. Again, it's kind of surprising. We always think about if people want to come in and have ping pong tables and dogs, but actually often the financial things really come to the fore. And then, we chose some more quirky things which made a difference. So we use a mental health app called Spill, which is embedded in Slack, and you can instantly have a therapy session. And we see high usage. I mean, people do that and are grateful for it, and it gets great feedback. So yeah, I think you've got to think about the differentiation. So what are you doing that's different? But also just make sure that the benefits you're actually delivering are meaningful.
And you're a company that is all about AI. AI is, or some people have AI coming for all of our jobs. Other people paint a picture of AI working in tandem with humans. The report suggested that 17% of people already think that AI has taken their job. What do you sort of think the future of work is going to look like?
Well, I think it's going to be very different from what it is today. And, it's hard to fully predict. But I think we are firmly in the AI co-pilot phase, which is, and we have people in the company using AI. And of course, our product is an AI product. But, in our product, which, it gives drafting and summarization tools for legal contracts, right now, the lawyers use it. right? So they will summarize a contract or they will mark up a contract and then they will check their work. And they say, fantastic, we don't want to do the low value stuff. We want to be there to verify, and we want to solve the hard problems. And I think we see that within the company in our use of AI. So whether that's in support or sales or marketing, we're using AI across the board, and in engineering to write code, right? We're using it, but it's always human supervised. I think that will lead over time to job losses in companies. I think that's inevitable, and that stat you cite is kind of scary, but it's happening. And so I think people need to think about future-proofing their job. I think it will become more scary when we see fully autonomous AI applications in companies, and that's where you don't need to check. We're not there yet, but GPT-5 is coming out. The pace of development is breathtaking. Who knows? And I think what will that mean for the future of work? It will mean a very different way of working, and I think there will be some problems, but I think there'll be some positives. So I think creativity will be valued more than it's valued today. I think that's good. There will always be complex problems that people will want to discuss with humans. There'll be human collaboration. But I think the roles and the jobs will be very different from what they have been. Now, for us as a company with our value Be More Human, that's been passionate about building a great place to work, we think there are net positives. But the shape of that, like who knows what that will look like in a few years' time.
Do you have policies on AI? I mean, you mentioned that lawyers are using it, and I recall a story of a lawyer using ChatGPT to set case precedents. And when he presented this to the court, it turned out that 4 of these cases had been completely made up. So, lawyers have been bitten by this tool. What about you as a company? Do you sort of allow people to use these tools if they want to, or do you say they have to declare it? What's your policy around that?
So we're pretty strict. And I think there are, a couple of reasons for that. One is we have spent a lot of time on privacy in the past. So, we have hundreds of millions of legal data points with a lot of personal data. And that's, it's very important that we have the safeguards around that, and GDPR and the other regulations around the world, are there for a reason. And so I think there is a lot of AI happening, not in the case of Juro, which is people throwing in confidential and sensitive information to ChatGPT and hoping for the best. We're not there. And so the way we control for that is policies, so written policies, but also education and training, because, it's one thing to have a document. It's another to have people understand what it really, really means. And of course, in our product, that we did a huge amount of work on information security and privacy to kind of get the baseline there. What we also say to customers is check the work. And so AI will hallucinate. And if you're not verifying and you're not checking at this point in time, then of course that risk persists. And so again, it comes back to good old humans. And so humans still play a really, really big role.
Fantastic. And that's all we've got time for. But that was an absolutely fascinating chat. Thank you, Richard, so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.